Hello again everybody, and today for the third in my series of talks about the Jewish world and its interaction with the classical world, I'm going to move on to the end of the Hasmonean dynasty, which got established in my previous talk, and we come to its demise in the second half of the 1st century BC. In particular, the Hasmoneans came to an end at the hands of Herod, who is known as Herod the Great. And I want to pose a question for you today, which is whether Herod was great or not. He's one of the most famous men in the New Testament, and he's reviled by Christians traditionally, and he's also reviled by Jews. But in the New Testament he's reviled by Christians because he was the king who was king when Jesus was born, and it was said that he was so paranoid that he wanted to, he was terrified of another king being born who would overthrow him. And it was said in Matthew's Gospel that he ordered the slaughter of any children under the age of 2 around the time of the birth of Jesus. And there is some doubt historically about whether that was actually true, because none of the other gospel writers record that, but we'll come on to that perhaps a little bit later. So who was Herod? Where did he come from? How did he come to be king? Well, he didn't come from Judea at all. He actually came from Idumea originally, which is a territory to the south of Judea, and his father was an Idumean, and his mother apparently was a Nabatean. Now you might remember the Nabateans were a nomadic Arabian tribe whose origins we're not quite sure about. But anyway, so he was not by lineage a true-born Jew. Yet he ended up as king of Judea, and part of the reason for this was his very skillful political manipulation. He managed to get himself in, first of all with Mark Antony, and then later with Octavian, who changed his name to Augustus. So he knew how to work the political levers, certainly, so maybe he was great in that sort of way. He was born in the late 70s BC in Idumea, and he sucked up to, there's no other way to put it really, the people in the triumvirate, particularly initially Julius Caesar, who gave him some political advantage, and later on to Mark Antony. In 37 BC, he wanted to become king of Judea, and so he besieged Jerusalem. In fact, he took Jerusalem with the help of Mark Antony's troops. He initially appointed himself king, and this was then confirmed by the Roman Senate, although quite how the Roman Senate thought it was up to them to confirm a Jewish king is a matter of some dispute. He clearly saw himself in the tradition of all-powerful Hellenistic kings, having absolute power, but with responsibilities to look after their people and perhaps to do things like build cities and leave a long-lasting architectural legacy, and he certainly achieved that. He held the Romans against Parthians, but he antagonized the Jews, both rich and poor. So there was, he united both the Pharisees and the Sadducees in disliking him. He rebuilt the temple, the second temple, including the wall, which is the Western Wall, which is the only bit that survives of that today. He also offended the Jews by putting a Roman eagle on his rebuilding of the temple, which is not great really by Jewish standards. He rebuilt Samaria, which he renamed Sebaste, which is the Greek version of Augustus. He rebuilt Caesarea, including a very large harbour there with concrete, which he succeeded in building concrete walls into the sea with new technology. Put down quite a lot of banditry, which was a major problem in that area, but he was a vicious and cruel leader and very fearful and paranoid about attacks. It was because of this that he then fortified the rock citadel of Masada in the desert, which will become a feature in a later talk. It's said by some, particularly modern historians, that he was prepared to commit any crime in order to gratify his unbounded ambition. Well, that'd be entirely consistent with a Hellenistic king, maybe not so much with a Jewish king. He sort of lived life as a Jew, and he did some Jewish things, sort of living by dietary laws. He built quite a lot of ritual purification baths, mikvehs, but on the other hand, his lifestyle and the palace culture wasn't really Jewish at all, and he was certainly disapproved of by Orthodox Jews. To the later writer Josephus, Josephus was quite equivocal about him. In an earlier work, The Jewish War, he said he was quite good at building stuff, and he gave him quite a good write-up, but in his later book, Jewish Antiquities, he was quite critical of his tyranny and the atrocities that he committed. He introduced foreign entertainments. At one point, he was apparently president of the Olympic Games in Greece. And that didn't go down too well with more of the Orthodox, but then he appointed only priests in order to restore the temple, and so that went down quite well. There was the Massacre of the Innocents, maybe. That's only mentioned in Matthew's Gospel, and that might be a conflation of him killing his own sons, because he didn't have a very good record on that, as I'll show to you in a list in a minute. He died horribly, perhaps of arteriosclerosis, perhaps he was eaten alive by worms. Either way, it was very painful, and it was so painful that he actually tried to stab himself to death, but was prevented by Salome, amongst others. Where was he buried? Well, Josephus describes in quite a lot of detail where his tomb was. Modern archaeologists have sought after this for some time, and in 2007 Israeli archaeologists proclaimed that they had found the tomb of Herod. This has been somewhat disputed. Other archaeologists in 2013 said it wasn't big enough and grand enough for someone of his megalomaniac ambitions, so the jury is out even on the location and the manner of his tomb. Some people say he unites Jews and Christians, by whom he is equally loathed, but some say he was the greatest ever leader for Jewish architecture. But then on the other hand, he did kill his wife, Mariamne, and her 2 sons, and her brother, and her grandfather, and her mother. He also had 8 other wives and fathered 14 children. Was he great? In some ways he was a great builder. He was certainly a great schemer and political manipulator, but not a great man. What might this have to say to us today? Well, those of great ambition and great tyranny look around the world today at leaders and think about those who've tried to achieve immortality through their architecture. If you go to Eastern Europe, to Romania, President Ceausescu spent a huge amount of money building a gigantic palace in the middle of Bucharest in his own honour. Lots of people around the world have done similar things, but it didn't make them great leaders. Ultimately, although there are some disputes about Herod, I would never call him great.